involves new business models. Disruptive technology is a prod to an organisation, an operation, an ecosystem to change the business model. It does require new skills, it requires new ways of thinking. You've heard from Chris around the approach that they have applied in breaking down big teams to smaller units. I love it. I didn't have huge mega teams, I had small teams, and they took such pride and ownership in the work that they had undertaken, and they were held accountable, and they were happy to be held accountable. But it was also important to ensure that we built the necessary structures around them to make it available for them to succeed. So the new attitudes, the new cultures, the new ways of doing things, again, new ways to collaborate. And it doesn't mean that it will only be on government side. It's also nice to actually move teams at times in and out of environments to be able to do that. I reflected back on an example of a fairly disruptive, positively disruptive piece of technology that we pioneered, in the sense of pioneered into our Australian government environment and our facilities, and that was the use of telepresence. So for those of you who've been to Australia, you will probably know and appreciate that we're a fairly big landmass, but we're what we call fringe dwellers. It's very arid and dry in the centre, it's hot and harsh. Not many live there except for really important First Peoples. Our Indigenous populations are widespread throughout some very arid and remote communities. And we had used satellite telecommunications and other forms of communications to be able to take services to those communities and the like. So we were well familiar with modes of operation in technologies for that. However, Canberra is the centre of our government, so we have politicians that fly into Canberra for their sessions, their house meetings, you know, the operations of government. And ministers were somewhat frustrated, I think, again, about the quality of service that was just always dependent on location. So 2009, you might recall the Copenhagen Climate Conference, a really big and important event in life. And we deployed internationally the first secure telepresence operation for our minister, two ministers that were leading into that program. We had done very quiet work in the background at home, having a small unit environment established in our Canberra facilities. We had lots of help from our security and intelligence people to help us with really good industry support as well. And we were able to make available for our minister for any time of day, 24-hour period, for she to be able to hook back into Australia and have very detailed, secure, high-level telepresence interaction, being able to beam documents for them to be able to see and discuss, and to get access to personnel that couldn't also be on site in Copenhagen. Hugely beneficial and helped us then to be able to convince two things. One, for that to be nationally deployed and significantly resourced. So we have it now Australia-wide, and it's not just at the federal level, it's also at the state and territory governments level, and also with some local government participation. It changed the way both ministers, their own office, and the administration were able to work. So it was a form of a disruptive technology, very positive, huge savings in terms of flying around the country for various meetings and administrators going, following a minister or joining a minister in a particular location. It also addressed issues of reducing greenhouse emissions. So it had multiple benefits in that process. Importantly, it has also been used extensively around times of natural disasters and in response to community health and safety issues. So just a small little insight in terms of some of the innovative technology that we had applied, becoming now very mainstream, and people just talk about it as if it's, well, that's what you would have, isn't it? But in 2009, it certainly wasn't. One of the other areas I'd just like to comment on is around data, and lots of data, loads of data. So the open data agenda that again had been advocated and pioneered and so well led from here in the US and embracing countries worldwide, we certainly have been strong supporters of that from the Australian environment, both federally and at tiers of government. And the issue for me, I think, is not just around hacking and data hacks and other creative ways, but how do we open up so much more of what we have in our government environment to be able to help in whole new ways of doing business and creating business opportunities through access to some of the data, which is in fact data that should be out there either for business to exploit and new niche businesses operating. And one of the areas that I did a large amount of work with is in our geosciences area, and unlocking a whole lot of that data, first of all, to be able to help not only for our own purposes within government, but to open it up for industries for exploration and other important natural resource management practices. So we have data, we have an array of technology now. We have finite resources in terms of monies that will be made available for investment and resourcing. We have opportunities to be able to keep new entrants within governments who are able to actively contribute from day one rather than being held back because of what we have in our environments that are perhaps of the old school style. We have opportunities to be able to challenge new ways of working and create the culture. At senior leadership level of all of you who are in the room today, this is your opportunity to be able to continue to address that and to succeed. And I look forward to further discussion with the panel members. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. And finally, we are delighted to have Chris Kontakis. He's the Vice President of IT in the Technology and Operations Group at the Public Broadcasting Service. Established in 1970, PBS and its more than 350 member stations is an institution trusted by Americans. In this role, he leads a broad mix of technology initiatives across PBS, including infrastructure and operations, helping PBS succeed in its nonprofit mission. Please join me in welcoming Chris Kontakis.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. Can you hear me? Oh, okay, great. So again, thanks for having me. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the conference yesterday. I just drove in from DC this morning, but it sounds like you've all been having a fantastic time. So in the intro, you mentioned I'm Vice President of IT at PBS, and so I oversee a department of it's a mix of traditional infrastructure and operations, so help desk operations, networks, security, databases, storage, managing our data center. And then on the other side of my department, I have several software development teams that build software across the broadcast media supply chain, which I'll talk a little bit about, as well as support of all of our business systems, our HR systems, ERP systems, intranet, extranet, which services the member stations across the United States. So I was asked to come and talk a little bit about what PBS is up to these days and how we are reacting to a lot of the disruption in the media landscape. So, there were a few statistics mentioned about PBS in the intro. And really, at a high level, our mission is to provide content that educates, informs, and inspires. And we see ourselves as America's largest classroom and as America's largest stage. Every year, 91% of American households watch PBS. They tune into PBS. And every month, 104 million viewers are viewing content from the PBS member stations in their local communities. We're proud to say we have a rich history of innovation. We were the first broadcast network to broadcast over satellite, and we were the first broadcast network to broadcast high definition. So, as I mentioned, the media landscape, it's changing rapidly. In my last two positions before PBS, I was led software development at Washington Post, and then just before PBS, I was a CTO at Atlantic Media Company, publisher of The Atlantic, and government executive, which many of you may read. And so I went through the disruption and sort of the transformation of print to digital, and so it's an interesting time to be at PBS as we're transforming really how broadcast works, how content is created, how content is viewed, how content is distributed out to viewers is changing very rapidly with cord cutters, streaming, YouTube, social media, technology with cameras is changing rapidly. It's much easier to create content, and so it's really an exciting time for us at PBS. And so what are we doing to react to the disruption in the industry? Well, first of all, we're very lucky that we're a very well-respected institution in America. We do annual surveys that show that PBS is one of the most trusted brands in the United States. And taxpayers actually see us as one of the best ways that taxpayer money is spent, number 2 to the U.S. military. But we're focusing on great content, so that's our number 1 priority. I don't know who all in here watches Downton Abbey. Downton Abbey was a huge success. Sherlock, Nova, NewsHour. We're really proud of the rich and inspiring content that we provide. And then really getting more into the technical side of things, we're really striving we see content, it should be ubiquitous. We're trying to get content out on every platform in front of as many eyeballs as possible. When I joined PBS about 3 years ago, we were streaming about 200 million streams a month of content. We're now approaching, we're around 400 million streams a month of content, which is on pbs.org, on our mobile apps. And so it's growing like crazy, but at the same time, our broadcast is still doing great. This past October, we announced that we became number 6 in primetime audience ratings, knocking ESPN out of the number 6 slot. So our content's doing great on the digital side, but it's also continuing to do great on the broadcast side. We're taking a lot of risks. I heard you heard that mentioned before about taking risk, and don't be afraid to fail. So we have a group at PBS called PBS Digital Studios, and they're experimenting a lot in social media. They've established several YouTube channels where they're having some fun. They did some auto-tune mix-ups of Mr. Rogers and Julia Childs, and these are things that are really going viral and taking off and just doing much more to really promote the brand and keep eyeballs on PBS content. We're building out services for member stations. We have a strong collaboration with member stations. We have a project right now that we're working on called Membership Video on Demand, where we're building a platform that will allow our member stations to connect with communities in a fundraising area to provide content and services to members of the community that become members of their local station. So perhaps longer streaming rights or earlier streaming rights for the next great Downton Abbey or the next great program that's coming out. And then we're rebuilding our entire distribution system, and this is where I'll talk a little bit more about the sort of the down in the weeds technical stuff. So we're currently on the 5th generation of our interconnection system, and interconnection is how we provide content out to the member stations. This generation, we call it V5, and so we're now working on our V6 project. It was funded with federal dollars for 10 years, and it expires in October of 2016. And that technology, it's primarily satellite out to every member station. So today what we do is we ingest content from our producers in Arlington, Virginia. We do all the magic to get it ready for broadcast and for Netflix and iTunes and Amazon, the transcoding and all that magic. And then we send it out over a satellite to every member station. Every member station ingests it and archives it. And if you think about it, so first of all, it's one-way communications, and it's a lot of duplicated content across the membership system. So we're looking at building a new platform, a new distribution system, the V6 system, which is going to involve building out a nationwide IP network. And this is really going to transform so much about PBS and how we think about content and delivering content out to the American public. So it's going to provide a mesh network where the stations now can very easily collaborate and share content. Today, if a Vermont station wants to trade content or share content with a Kentucky station, they're typically FedExing tapes, and it's just a very slow, sort of old school way of working. In the new world, we see them jumping onto a high-speed network and delivering content, putting it up into the network, and we'll have a rich, searchable interface that any member station can log into, search for their content, pull it down, and put it up over their airwaves. And so behind that, a lot has to happen. And so behind the distribution system, which we're actually in the middle of an 18-station proof of concept right now. We did a 4-station proof of concept about a year ago just to prove the technology works and it's there. But behind that, there's a lot of challenges that come with building an IP network. Security is certainly a top concern. Satellite is being a one-way network. It's a little bit easier to manage and control. With this IP network, we have challenges around security. We have challenges around metadata. Suddenly, content is much more easily accessible. Much more content is flowing into the system from the member stations. So we have to have a rich and robust data model planned out to make this all work and to make content searchable and findable. We're building out a large digital asset management system, which we really see as the core of the system. So as assets flow into PBS, the metadata will live in this DAM, and the DAM will maintain everything it knows, everything we know about a program, including where the physical asset lies. It may live in our data center in Springfield, or it may live in AWS. We don't really care where the content lives. And then sort of abstracting all these services that will power the system behind the scenes, we're building out an enterprise service bus architecture. So really adopting SOA. And there's a couple of reasons that we're doing this. We started the ESB project last year to really start retiring technical debt. We had a lot of debt that we're sort of bringing along over the last 8 to 10 years as the system was continued to evolve, and it was holding us back in many ways. So now we're building out this very beautiful, very elegant architecture so that we can be much more nimble and evolve and scale in a much more elegant way to meet the current demands as well as the future demands. If we don't do this, we're going to constantly be living with sort of custom code and very tightly coupled systems. And so this is going to allow us to be much more, as I said, nimble and be able to evolve. I mentioned metadata, and then sort of on the enterprise side, we're trying to make our end users' lives a little bit easier. So we started going for some quick wins on our infrastructure and operations side. In this past year, we launched Box. I think you're going to hear from Aaron Levy at Box shortly. We rolled out Box to every user at PBS, and it was one of those moments where I typically don't get too many thank you notes from across the organization. I usually hear when things are broken and when people are unhappy. I started getting flooded with thank you notes when I rolled out Boxes. Suddenly, our end users just had a really easy way to share content. It just works. And at the same time, we rolled out single sign-on across many of our applications. And again, I got thank you notes for single sign-on. Suddenly, you just didn't have to remember passwords. It just made life a little bit easier. And then we're now in the process of rolling out mobile device management. So your password, when you change your password, it's synced across all your mobile devices, and it's not sort of all this craziness of turning your phone into airplane mode and doing all kinds of magic to just change your password. So it's a lot of work, and some of the key takeaways that I would leave you with is, so I heard Agile mentioned a lot. We certainly adopted Agile in our software development, and it's also working with small teams. It's allowed us to be much more nimble, but it's also allowed us to empower our end users. So we're collaborating in ways that we weren't in the past. So really having the business stakeholders sitting with us and allowing them to determine what direction we're going to go and what we're going to work on next, it's made for a much better and stronger partnership. We've been prototyping wherever possible. In the past, I think there was sort of an inclination or a trend to sort of look at what the big tools in the marketplace were and just buy the one that sounded like it could be the best one. And we stopped doing that. We started doing proofs of concepts where we actually would do a modest investment to actually bring in a technology and see if it actually worked. And it's helped us on our digital asset management system. It's helped us on our enterprise service bus. It's really been very successful. And then finally, collaboration. I can't stress enough collaborating with the business users, having technology folks physically sitting with the business, interacting with the business on a daily basis, and really understanding the business has really gone a long way to change how we're building products at PBS. And so that's really that's all I had to share with you, and I hope that was helpful and informative. So.
So, Chris, I'd now like to invite you back up to the stage along with Ann and Chris for some Q&A with the audience. And I'd just like to reflect on the incredible diversity of organizations we just heard from and missions, right? So we heard from a nonprofit media company, a for-profit transportation experience company, and a nation. So vastly different scales and missions and ages. We have a company that's less than 10 years old, a 45-year-old media company in a 100-plus-year-old country. So it's interesting looking at the multiple scales and time horizons of these organizations, and yet they've all become very innovation-friendly. So it's a great time to ask some questions of how they achieve that level of innovation, embracement, and adoption across their organizations. So would anyone like to ask any questions of the panel?
Thank you. This question is for all of you, particularly for Ann. I'm sort of in just a little bit to the right of the median age group here. So okay, no need to laugh. What advice would you have for young Turks like myself, or the younger ones in the group, to make a difference and get ahead and make things happen? And that won't necessarily apply to the government. For those of you in the private sector, I'd like your perspective too.
Okay, so I'll start. My recommendation would be to put your hand up and ask to do something new, something different. Or put your hand up and say, I'd really like to take on this tough piece of work, and can I please have some resources, some people from across various organizations. Be a leader and being willing to be part of the change process.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that as well. I love that advice. So the thing that I've used over my career when I'm faced with a decision of go one path or another, I try and pick the one that scares the crap out of me and go with that. Just whatever what's the biggest, scariest thing that I can go for and go take a risk and try and deliver, I go for that. Now that said, you don't do it alone. You build a team and you celebrate the victories of the team, and you learn from the failures, but celebrate the victories and make sure that you're sharing knowledge equally and reporting out well, and that's extremely beneficial as you're starting out on a path.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. In fact, throughout my career, I've always, when I look at the next step that I'm taking, if I'm not feeling nervous, if I'm not feeling scared, then it's probably not the right opportunity. I'm always trying to sort of push the envelope and take that risk, but also bring a strong team along with me to make it a success.
Any other questions? You must have some. I'll ask one.
I have one.
All right.
So how do you experiment and try new ideas And is there a formal process? Is it informal? And then on the back end, if there is failure, how do you manage that process? Thanks.
Sure, I'll start with that one. So I think first and foremost, I like doing a fairly informal ideation process. And I do a few things around cadence with that. I try and make sure that I do a monthly team all hands, where everybody in the team is involved, and there's always a question and answer session. It's just very open, like it's an AMA, like anything is on the table, anything. I may not be able to answer, but they can certainly ask anything. I also like to do regular planning sessions with my leadership team, and I steer those, but I don't dictate what's happening in them. And usually the way I run those is I lay out kind of my view of the objectives and what we want the end state to look like. And then I try to stimulate discussion amongst the leadership team of how do they think that we can get there? And then I encourage them to, when it gets down to the next detailed level, right? So from there, we come up with more concrete, like, programs. And then from there, I have them work with their teams to get to that next level of detail. And again, like open brainstorming kind of format, things on Post-its, things on whiteboards, kind of organize it, put everything down and get as much together as you can, and then kind of cut away the things that aren't relevant. And I find that to be useful.
And I've seen it done, a couple different approaches that have worked with various organizations I've been with. I've seen formal processes in place where we have teams that get that 20% to just sort of experiment, throw stuff up on the wall, see what works. And in several cases at the Post and at Atlantic Media, these ideas actually became new features on the website. At PBS, I'm empowering my teams to come up with ideas, and don't be afraid to just come to me and say, hey, I've got this idea, and that's really how our Enterprise Service Bus project came to be. The developers said, this is crazy. Every time we try to swap out a new technology, we break 100 other things, and we've got to fix all this custom code. What do you think about prototyping a new SO architecture? And I said, let's just go for it. And it now became a very formal project that we approached the senior leadership with, and we got funding for it, and now it's a formal project.
I like to delegate. I like to let my leads lead. And in a couple of my big initiatives in the development of the MyGov environment, it was take some time going and create the traditional sort of storyboard around what might that look like. But I asked them to not just have it as a concept from their eyes. I wanted to see what a user view of it was, and let them bring that forward. And when we were in the very early phases, it was then made available to the rest of the unit to get their reactions and get their perspectives, and then gradually widening it out. And on your last question around addressing issues of failure, fail fast, fail with why it failed, here are my lessons and what we're going to do next.
Good morning. So you guys have all, in one way or another, addressed taking risks, potential failures. So Chris, this is actually for you. One of our previous keynotes, Lisa Bedell, said that in the cities of the future, there will be no cars. What does Uber do?
I don't know how much I believe that. So maybe I'm self-serving. No, so I believe that cars are an incredibly inefficient asset. If you think about the data around it, the average American spends about $10,000 a year on an asset that they use less than 10% of the time. So you have large investment and very low yield. So I agree with the concept of personal car ownership on the decline. However, I think if you look at the gap between the infrastructure that we have in place today around public transportation, and if you look at the varying quality of public transportation across the country, there's going to be a gap there that has to be solved. So I can definitely buy off on personal car ownership as, yeah, probably not happening in majority of cities. I actually know a lot of people in San Francisco, in New York, in LA, that just don't have cars anymore because they use our service. I pretty much, if I don't walk to the ferry to catch the boat to the city, I'll drive my car, it's 9/10 of a mile. I feel horrible admitting that there are days where I won't walk 9/10 of a mile to the ferry. It's my personal shame. But other than that, I use the car on weekends and that's it. And there's really no point in having it. So, you know, I can see it in some areas, but I think we have further to go in making public transportation a great experience and raising the level of that everywhere before that's really going to be a reality.
Yeah, let me maybe generalize that question for Chris and Ann. How do you anticipate the disruptive effects of technology changes, societal changes, so you can respond to them? So you mentioned the change in the broadcast paradigm, if you will.
Right, yeah, so I mean, we see it changing just constantly, and it's just faster and faster every day. And so for us, it's about being on top of technology and being aware of how, you know, the younger generations are exploring content, about how they're viewing content. One of the interesting facts about I threw out that number of the number of digital streams we do every month. About 70% of that is children's content. And so really being aware of how the younger generations are using technology is very important for us.
I think mobility and embedded technology, I think that's going to still have significant disruption and displacement as well. But I really look forward to it. I'm really excited about a lot of the new technologies for health-related things. I think that's an incredibly important part. But just the freedom and ease of access to data and information in a highly mobile, wherever you go, you no longer need to lug around stacks of information. We seem to be still pretty happy with paper. That's not good. So I think we really need to break through on a whole heap of that. You know, I don't think I bought a hardback novel in ages. It's just not on.
Another question over here?
So you've added to great insights that we've heard at the conference around innovation, building in small chunks, getting teams together, working with users. This is a question more about innovating to scale. All three of you are involved in enterprises that have vast numbers of users, national, international, et cetera, and developing systems that, much like the systems that the folks in this room work on, whether they're in government or industry, are really at a scale level. How do you move from these great innovative thoughts to building systems that are sustained at a large enterprise level?
Well, so one of the first new positions I created when I started at PBS was for an enterprise architect. And so I saw architecture as really critical in that area as we're sort of exploring new things, new ideas, new concepts. It's one thing to build a quick proof of concept or a prototype. It's another thing to make it scale. And so now I have architects that are thinking about that and thinking about how does software scale and how to build it in the right way. And so that's been really critical for us, having that kind of talent in-house.
I would echo that sentiment very much. I think paying attention to architecture, getting away from monolithic structures, getting to more component level service-oriented architecture, and then trying to make every service that comprises the overall solution scale horizontally, scale automatically, fail gracefully, restart itself, have some level of survivability. One of the really interesting things that's happening in the Valley right now is around Chaos Monkey. If you're not familiar with it, it is basically code that you inject into your environment to create recurring failures at different points of the infrastructure. And it effectively creates a constant state of disaster, you know, a kinder, gentler disaster, if you will. And you use that to make your service more resilient.
And from my perspective, I think one of the really important things here is not just around the architecture, because that's basically gospel for what you should be doing for high quality, both design and management practice. But it's about how do I scale this up, how do I deploy rapidly, quickly, and have an available capacity there to do it. And I think things like access to cloud-based services, etc., it really gives the freedom to be able to do that. When I was doing the big $600 million technology refresh program for Centrelink back in 2002, a long time ago now, 2003, I wanted capacity on demand because we had to, up and down with demand. So Centrelink is the provider of government welfare-based services and benefits and a range of things. And there would be peaks, real big peaks and troughs, etc. And we were trying to move them from the fact to buy big and have it in-house to be able to consume on demand when I needed to be able to just manage this up and down flow. And so I think major changes that we've got around cloud and other helps us to be able to scale better, but with a higher quality.
Hi, so thank you all for being here. It was very insightful discussions and I appreciate it. My question for you is a little bit different slant. We all know technology is changing so quickly. There are so many choices for things that we can put into place. Do you have some kind of technique or method that you use to scan the environment and see what's out there, and then to choose which one of these great ideas are we going to move forward with, or which 10 of the 5,000 are we going to move forward with?
So I think the first question is great idea or great product. So the first thing you have to think about is, is it build or buy? And then from there, so first off, let's talk for a second about build or buy. If you have the capabilities to build, generally speaking, for something that is very close to what you do and is very much part of the core of what you do, you're going to get a better product if you build. If it is something that is non-differentiating, it's commodity technology, you're better off buying. So I think that's always the first step. And then from there, you have to think about what really matters to me, what are my most important requirements, and enumerate those out and think about what are the things that I cannot live without, what are the things that I'm willing to give up, what are the things I'm willing to wait on. And then it's going out to the market and doing the research. There's nothing better than legwork. And there's no fast way to do it. Google is probably the best method, I think, for going out and seeing what's out there. And then, the way I do it is if I'm thinking about a particular technology, I have access to some different resources in that I have some VCs that I can call and say, hey, what's the great thing that you've invested in this space? And I want to meet with those people. Short of that, it's going to the Google box and going, all right, Google, tell me what I need to know.
So I agree with that, doing all the research. And I mentioned we've started doing proofs of concepts quite a bit at PBS, and that's allowed us to sort of dabble with the technology, make the modest investment just to make sure it's the right investment before we go all in and invest many millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars into a technology.
From some of ours, it was get some independent people to go and do a bit of the research, a bit of the legwork for us as well. A large number of agencies would also have set teams that they might do that, and we'd invite them to bring that information into our central environment so that we could have a better view and understanding of it. But again, I think some of the other in the Australian environment, we would look to some of the big banks in particular who were going through major big refresh projects and initiatives, and just have discussions with them as well. And of course, just with our normal networking within a government environment across other international jurisdictions, just to keep alert to what might be there.
Kathy Conrad.
Thank you again for joining us. You've all been talking about some of the great user research you've done to improve dramatically the experience of your customers. What have you learned that may be applicable as we look to improve the experience that the public has with government information and government services?
Okay, so I think one of the things that still stands out, two things that really stand out from the Australian research, and this is, we did customer satisfaction from 2002 and had some informed feedback from that. And one was trust, about trust in what the service is and how government is actually providing that service. And the other one that is persistent is accessibility. How easy is it to gain access to the information service, data, etc. One area that's starting to bubble up now, it hadn't been high on the list, but it's certainly come to the fore now, is who is gaining access to our data. There's been some new legislation that's been introduced around more of our intelligence-based services and the like, our legal environments gaining access to data, personal data. So that's becoming a little bit of an issue.
So Chris, you mentioned the desire to make magic the experience, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, magic is a great bar. Yeah, trying to think how to expand on that. You know, you want an experience that people just, it just works. It's just simple. It's intuitive, right? So actually, so here's my favorite story on an intuitive experience. So I was at Dreamforce a few years ago, and I was sitting on Salesforce's advisory council, and we're having breakfast, and we're talking, and I'm talking with the former CIO from Salesforce who had moved on to a different job, but interesting guy, and we were talking about our kids and the experiences that they were having with an iPad, right? And that our kids were voracious content consumers, and actually my daughter is a voracious consumer of your services on the iPad. Extensive. So the thing that was really interesting with this is, you know, he told me a couple weekends prior they were all having breakfast, and his 5-year-old son came running into the kitchen and said, "Daddy, Daddy, the TV's broken, it won't change channels." So he goes, "All right, well, take me out there, show me what's going on." And he takes him into the living room and goes up to their, you know, flat screen television and puts 2 fingers on the television and swipes. Because it doesn't work. Not magic.
So that's a pretty high bar to set for the federal government, I just have to say.
You know, if you don't, I mean, my thought is if you don't aim high, you don't get anywhere, right? If you shoot for the middle, okay. But, you know, why not go for it? The worst that's going to happen, if you really go for it, if you really stretch and you really push, and you fail to hit that mark, you'll probably still land in the middle. Then make it better the next rep.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Another thing I would say is performance. You know, sites need to load really fast. So you have great analytics tools out there so you can see how your end users are engaging with your content. But also the site just has to perform. It just needs to be really quick, really fast, or you'll lose eyeballs and you'll lose trust.
Angela?
This is for the entire panel, but as you know, most organizations have limited resources and budgets, especially in government organizations. So how do you innovate in an environment where resources are constrained, where budgets are shrinking? Or do you have some ideas that can be used to kind of spur innovation in those types of organizations?
So is that around the management of the cost of human capital and of workers, or around software costs? I'd say both. So I already gave my speech about, I love small teams, right? And small teams that are bought into a mission can be incredibly productive. So I think that's a big key. And also there is an opportunity, if you have a very compelling mission, to get younger resources who are relatively fresh out of school, who generally come at a lower cost. And then on the software side, the open source community has amazing resources available. I'm a huge fan of open source software. I've been involved in some way or another in open source since 2000. I strongly recommend that you investigate open source options for different parts of your infrastructure whenever possible. And the great thing is you can take those components and then build on them and customize to your needs.
That's actually a great question. It's something we're challenged with at PBS. We don't have unlimited budgets, and one thing I would say is it forces us to prioritize. And so we're constantly asking ourselves and asking our directors, what should we just stop doing? There's a lot of things that we bring along for the ride that we just keep doing because we think we have to do it. And so the first question we're really asking our teams is, what can you stop doing? So we just went through our budget cycle for next year, and it didn't increase. And so the question came up again, what can we stop doing and just leave it behind and focus really on the initiatives that are going to move the business forward?
I think times of tight budgets are a fantastic thing because they stimulate innovation. They stimulate a positive response to let's look at the way in which we can do this differently and get on and do it. And so some of the examples from my environment where I took $1 billion out of the IT budgets of CIOs, I wasn't the most pleased or loved person in town, either by industry or my government colleagues. But it drove the important agenda of build it once, use it many times. And it wasn't just about my agency being the custodian of the money pot. It was about where do we need to absolutely invest in new technology or a new service offering and adequately resource that initiative, that project, if it was done by any one of the agencies, and make it the product that the others would consume, rather than to try and carve out the budget and give little bits of money all around, never enough, and only substandard work. So I love it when you get a tight budget.
All right, we have time for one last question.
So I have one last one. We heard from Mike Walsh yesterday talking about think big, think new, think quick. In your experiences, we've heard from you guys. Do you guys think we can actually do that in today's environment? And all three?
I think you must. I think that's just kind of the new bar of what it takes to survive and excel in the world we're in.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's reality. That's today. If you're not doing it, you're not part of the game.
All right, on that note, let's thank the panel for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And if you stick around, we're going to transition to Francis Rose, who's going to introduce our next fireside chat. Thanks.